The most recent Quest update sounds like it's rolled out to pretty much everyone, and you might have noticed some changes like Horizon Worlds is now just Worlds. You can see live captions of anything, including in-game chat, although it's not the best. Or you might have finally gotten the updated UI that was promised a few updates ago and now seems to have reached most headsets, but there were some features that weren't mentioned so publicly, weren't advertised so much, and maybe are going to be a little less popular to those of you out there who like privacy or like your headset not updating on its own. But one that we know everybody just loves to hear about is you now have an advertising ID, a unique device indicator that app developers can use to show you more relevant ads on Meta Horizon OS. Of course, this is something you can enable or disable, but for most of us, the mention of ads isn't something we're ever excited to hear about. On top of that, there was a post-release of a slightly updated version that also talked about bug fixes and improvements. But something to realize is that whenever the Quest gets an update, the consumer side gets the V76 potentially of the new feature. There's also the developer side with new APIs that enable them to try new features, whether they're experimental or not. And one that was experimental about 6 weeks ago was the ability to see the pass-through camera. Not quite in the full high definition that we're used to seeing it in mixed reality, but a 1280 by 960 resolution per camera at 30 FPS with a pretty high latency of 40 to 60 milliseconds. But this does mean where before we talked about with the Quest, developers could only see the dots around your room. Now this means potentially being able to access your full pass-through camera. They do say there is an approval process for each app, so this doesn't just roll to every developer on the Quest store, which would include millions of people at this point, but this quietly went out of experimental and can be included in any shipping apps. A lot of people in the scene taking this as a positive because this means they can make much more immersive mixed reality, meaning instead of it just kind of seeing there's a tabletop, it could even see an actual game board and put game pieces on those boards. Some of the demonstrations show it tracking a QR code around on the screen, being able to determine what's an actual person in the space. Well, one new app has already popped up showing this as a positive, saying that you can now easily capture 3D photos and 3D videos on the Quest 3 with this new pass-through camera API. Immer Gallery. The only problem being it is limited to that lower resolution, and still we talked about Quest Games Optimizer has now added a way to use yours as a 3D camera, although that is a paid app. But the other surprise that people have been noticing around Reddit and other places is that if you are someone who doesn't like your Quest updating automatically, you like to keep it on a certain update, whether that's for privacy reasons or because you're sideloading stuff that won't do well with the sudden update, the Quest Update V76 seems to be forcing across all Quests, pushing out onto the headsets whether you have it locked or not, and possibly making people lose access to what they had. So at that point, I'm curious, how are you feeling about Update V76? How do you feel about Horizon Worlds just being Worlds, the way they push it out on the store? Now knowing that your pass-through camera might be somewhat accessible, does that mean you're going to be more worried about how your room looks before you're using your headset, or maybe where you're standing, where there's mirrors, what you're wearing? Let me know in the comments. In the last news, it felt like we had a lot of hopeful conversations about things in the VR industry looking up, and literally the day I posted it while I was gone to Vegas, Meta announced they were laying off more people from their acquired VR studios, including even the most popular fitness app, Supernatural, the developer of Asgard's Wrath, Sanzaru Games. Supernatural announcing that they are trying to work more efficiently, but this will mean a reduced rate of workout releases on an app that you're already paying a pretty premium subscription price for, and one that when I used it for an entire year, I found it ran out of workouts so quick I was always wishing there was more workouts released. Publications had also reported that employees were even being laid off from the company's hardware side, which Meta did decline to actually comment on. This obviously adding to a lot of layoffs we've seen from other developers this year. And even while Meta is talking about still investing in other developers and in other game development, saying they're not giving up on VR game development, it's been an interesting cycle to watch overall because we've seen Meta acquire so many of these studios and then eventually streamline or cut them down. And it's a year where they've also said there's not going to be a big VR release. They've talked about Ray-Bans, which we'll cover later in the news, but there's not going to be a Quest 4 this year or another Quest rendition of any sort. They're going to rely on the Quest 3 and the Quest 3S for another year. It definitely doesn't feel like it's going to be a huge year for VR. This news about Meta comes as less of a surprise when you look at their Q1 revenue declining 6% due to lower Quest sales. Basically, Q1 2025 came out lower than Q1 2024, but keep that in perspective though, we did get a new headset that is far cheaper, meaning that more headsets could have been sold and not necessarily had the same revenue. The CFO at Meta did say in a call, quote, due to lower Meta Quest sales, which were partially offset by increased sales of Ray-Ban Meta AI glasses, end quote, meaning that they did see more of the Meta Ray-Ban sales, and no surprise because it's been the bigger push we've seen in their marketing and them saying that they've sold 2 million. And this also coming at a time when they're claiming that the Quest has seen more engagement. People are spending more time in the headset again, possibly due to this push towards freemium games that have unlimited playability, especially for a younger audience. But basically at this point, it looks like we're really looking forward to some sort of big Ray-Bans this year and a little bit less focus on VR. With this big push and focus on the Meta Ray-Bans, or the AI glasses, they're now calling them. They even changed the Meta View app that worked with it to Meta AI. It's looking like this year's is actually going to have a display inside of the Ray-Bans and also a wrist-worn XR controller. So similar to the Orions we've seen, they hit it pretty well in the marketing, but people were wearing some sort of a computing device or something on their wrist that helped them not only control the glasses, but helped relocate some of the computing power, potentially so they can put more battery inside of the glasses. Now it's looking like Ray-Bans are going to take from that and do the same thing. And a single display inside of the glasses, if you remember Google Glass, it was the same way, only one eye had a display that you would see. But the device, being codenamed Hypernova, is supposed to cost between $1,000 and $1,400, which is a pretty big shift from the current Ray-Bans that can cost around $300, especially when you consider if you just wanted the brand name Ray-Ban sunglasses, you're oftentimes paying around $200 anyways. Well, now to have smart ones with AI built in, be able to listen to music and take pictures or video, it wasn't that big of a reach to push for another $100 in those glasses and get all of those features. Well, now a big jump if you want a display in them and a computing puck, but this would mean you'd be able to view photos, access maps all through that screen inside, which would be pretty powerful for a pair of glasses you're supposed to be able to wear during the day and utilize in these situations. I know personally for me, I just got back from a trip to Japan where I got to try the new Star Wars game, which we talked about already, but I was using a lot of times Google Translate on my phone, holding up my phone, and it live translates another language to where you can read it in English. And I was like, man, these glasses would be a perfect fit if it could do that live inside the screen. You just looked at it with your eyes. But battery life will probably be a pretty big concern. They're also trying to bump up to a 12 megapixel camera in these new ones, hoping to rival the iPhone 13 from 2021, which even now I feel like the pictures and the video on the Ray-Bans are pretty acceptable. So seeing that jump up would be really nice. And although it may still have the capacitive touch buttons on the side like the Meta Ray-Bans do now, this new wristband would be able to detect things such as pinching and rotating your hands, bringing kind of hand tracking like we're used to on the Quest over to the Ray-Bans as well. What I hope is that they consider making them in a way that you can attach, either your Apple Watch or another thing to it, so then it doesn't feel like you just have to have another wristband on your wrists if you're already used to having something on you. We'll keep you reported, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that maybe we'll get a set of these or get to try them. I know at that price point we may not be sent them, but I'm excited at the idea of where this is leading to in the future, although we're a long ways from those Orions that are costing them $10,000 internally, having full AR capability inside of a pair of glasses we can wear everywhere. Although we don't have it completely confirmed, typically Meta tries to reveal these products and open up their sales at Connect every year, which takes place in September. And with all of their reductions at Meta and things going on, reportedly the Meta employees are working even weekends to try and ship these new glasses in October. Again, another report coming from outside, not directly from Meta, but they're saying that Meta's top priorities is launching these and sending them out in October, which would follow the exact same cycle we've seen when new Quests come out. They announce them at Connect, they do have them there for press to try, and then they allow people to open up pre-orders then that launch sometime later in October. But Meta may have said there was a slight risk of these being delayed, and they've told employees to accelerate their work, which means some of them are even coming in on weekends to try and finish them in time. Meta Connect 2025 is already scheduled for September 17th, although we've been fortunate enough to get to go the past few years. Now that there is no push for a new Quest this year, there is no VR headset, I have no idea whether we're going to get to go and cover Connect from there or if I'll be back live streaming it with all of you, but we'll do our best to keep you up to date on all of the news surrounding this, whether or not we get to go see or try these ourselves. As Meta does seem to be downscaling some of their departments and backing off a bit on VR, other companies are rising from those ashes, it seems, growing, expanding, and trying to push the VR landscape further. One that we've talked about before, Impact Reality, who originally started off as like VR marketing, then opened up flat to VR, taking some of the old flat games and adapting them to VR, now is opening Impact Inked, which is another wing looking to help push virtual reality studios that want to create new games and not just necessarily adapt older games, but bringing new innovations into the scene, helping them with providing funding, feedback, publishing, marketing, basically everything they've done before for these developers. So that means if you are out there, you're a developer with a new experience you're trying to bring to the world, this may be something you want to look into. And it's good news overall to the VR market that more companies are stepping in and taking those spots, even if Meta isn't necessarily funding like they used to. Although, of course, no new company is probably going to have the type of funding that Meta had, but still to see that more innovation is coming and there's still going to be a push for games from someone, I find personally exciting. And speaking of games, if you don't know about Quest Plus, we've talked about it quite a bit on this channel. Basically, Quest's version of PlayStation Plus or Xbox Game Pass, where you pay a subscription, you get newly chosen games every month, not necessarily brand new games, but it also has a catalog of older games you can go play for free too. Free as in the price of the subscription. But this month, some surprise additions: Pavlov's Shack, the Counter-Strike inspired VR tactical shooter, and a game that people played for a lot of years free in beta is going to be on there. So if you haven't paid the extra $20, but you do have Quest Plus, you're going to get access to that game again in its final state. And Kill It with Fire VR, a funny, maybe therapeutic or maybe horror game, depending on how you look at it, where there's spiders in your house and you have to take them out in the most extreme ways possible. With that, of course, there's quite a catalog of back games now that you get with Quest Plus, which I admitted a few months ago actually made it worth it, and I started Quest Plus myself. You can see a list here on the screen from things like Asgard's Wrath 2, big games, down to, much smaller games like Cubism or Tetris Effect. But definitely something if you're interested in checking out Quest Plus at this point, especially if you have a new headset and you don't have a lot of games, it does open a lot of the library. But you gotta remember, new games that you get, you're only gonna get to keep access if you keep paying. And if you did get a headset that included a few months, you're gonna have to start paying after that, or you will lose access to those games also. But at least there was some good news this week, along with all the other news going on. But what are you thinking out there right now? Are you pretty excited about the future of VR? Are you leaning more towards AI and Ray-Bans, more productivity style? Let me know in the comments down below. But thank you once again for being here with me, and I'll see you in another reality.